participate in this very important topic on the conflict in Ethiopia, in the Horn of Africa, a Pan-Africanist perspective of the conflict in Ethiopia. Thank you so much for joining us today for this program. And we want to always start as we always do by giving honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the American Indian people, Chicano people, Mexicano, Latino. Those are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. If that's not who you are, this is not your land. And they are engaged in a righteous struggle to get their land back. And we 100% support their struggle to get their land back. So we want to acknowledge them and their fight to do that. We want to acknowledge our African ancestors for those who choose to celebrate the Kwanzaa holiday. We encourage you to do anything that is even remotely connected to Africa. So we encourage that. Today is the first day, it's Umoja, which in Swahili means unity. So those celebrating that, we are encouraging you to continue to do that and do anything that honors our ancestors and their continuous fight for justice and liberation. So this past week had some individual challenges, mentioned the travel challenges. And then another thing that happened is I got two interesting death threats. Now, these threats happen all the time. And, it is what it is. It's just, you live in a society that's based on lies and you do your best to tell the truth, you're going to get conflict. And if if you're not prepared for that, then you need to try to do something else, because that's just what's going to happen. But these two were very interesting because they, what they did is they made the initial threat and then they came back. They try to make it look like it was multiple people, but I'm pretty sure it's the same people or person. And in the second version, they actually listed some family members of mine that they were going to harm. And, I looked at that and I look at everything as analytically as I can. And, I realized like people can find out a lot about you online, and the information, like some of the family members they listed are not even living anymore. But, for people listening, those of you racists, white supremacists, whoever listening, police agencies, the policy remains the same. Like, these people you can't stop somebody. If somebody wants to do something to you, they're going to do it. There's no way you can provide 100% protection against somebody doing something to you if they decide that's what they're going to do. But they get one chance. That's the policy. They get one chance to do that. And so, my advice to people making these threats is that you better make your chance good if you plan to follow through on it. Because if you don't succeed in that first chance, then your window of opportunity is closed, and that's bad news for you. So we move forward. We continue to move forward. We're glad to be here. And that is all the best way we can honor our ancestors, you all. So thank you for joining us for this very important program about the conflict in Ethiopia. And we will continue to go. And, we got some of these people trying to get in here now. They must have heard what I just said and got upset about it. But they won't be getting in today. And we are going to continue with our program with our introductions. So we want to say that Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we are honored to bring this programming to you every week, trying to provide an analysis that challenges the status quo. So the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party based in Africa. And we have a clear objective. That objective is the achievement of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. One unified socialist Africa. So we feel like this objective, when achieved, will bring about the fulfillment and aspirations of African people everywhere on earth. We believe that it is the solution to the problems we face, whether they be political, economic, social, whether they be related to white supremacy, patriarchy, whatever the issues are. Pan-Africanism is the foundation from which we solve these problems. And that is our work. And if you look at the right, you have the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by the founder of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, Kwame Nkrumah. And in that book, he outlines our strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism. And we have, without question, engaged in serious work all over the world, particularly at home throughout the African continent, to carry out that strategy outlined in the book that Nkrumah wrote that you see there on the right. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted every week by All African People's Revolutionary Party organizers, myself, Ajamu, and my amazing daughter, Shakura, who are both extremely active in the APRP and doing our best to contribute to our objective of Pan-Africanism as our contribution to the worldwide movement for justice and forward liberation. So thank you for joining us. Again, really appreciate you all being here. And to get us started, as always, I'll kick it over to Shakura.
Thank you so much, Daddy. I appreciate that. Greetings, everyone. I don't know about you all, but I was really thrown off last Sunday. So I, of course, echo everything my dad said, but I also want to speak for myself and just say that I'm grateful that you all were willing to be patient with us and understanding. And, you know, some of you even reached out and expressed concern or reached out and said that you look forward to being back on the broadcast for December 26th. However you responded to us canceling last week's session, we appreciate your camaraderie and your diligence to rejoin us. And I will speak for myself when I say the whole day was thrown off because I planned my whole Sunday around this seminar. So I'm really happy that we're back on track. I feel like the ancestors can take a sigh of relief because we are back to doing what I think they would be very proud of. And not to say that we didn't do Pan-African things last Sunday, because I'm sure it's not just in this window of the 6 o'clock hour that we're trying to do things, or the 4 o'clock hour, depending on where you are in the world. But I know that this seminar in particular is a big way for us to reach a large amount of people and to try to spread the truth as much as possible. And so it's extremely humbling to know that we can be a part of that, and to know that we are caveats, if you will, or pillars on that road trying to do that, which of course would explain why people are sending death threats and things like that, because we're doing the right thing, right? And so we're not selling this capitalist agenda. We're not telling you to go out and, you know, return all the gifts that you got yesterday that you didn't want, because that's not really going to impact the large amount of colonized people who are suffering as we speak. What we're encouraging you to do is to join some type of organization that is working for justice, so that those same colonized people who are suffering may not have to suffer as much when more of us organize and come together. And so I'm just really humbled by that. I'm humbled to do this work. And it's very, it's moving on a different level, because as my dad said, you know, people will stop and they'll try as much as they can to scare you and to threaten you and to do all these things. And I guess I'm grateful for that in a weird way. I know that sounds really weird, but I'm grateful to know that I'm doing something that you feel is so powerful, where you want to take my life. And I consider my life for the humanity of people. So if I'm supposed to die tomorrow, at least everyone will know I did my best. Truly, everyone will know that. I'm not ashamed to admit that. And I would be surprised if somebody said, well, Shakur was selfish and she only thought about herself, because that's never been my MO. So I'm really grateful to say that that's never been my MO. I'm grateful for this work. And more importantly, I'm grateful for the children who have yet to be born, because when they are born, they're going to live in a world that is so much better than the world that we're currently living in. And that's because of the work that we as organizers are doing today. So if you are an organizer and you have not yet patted yourself on the back for all the work that you're doing to make the world a better place, please do so now, because it is really important to acknowledge the labor that you're putting in, because the children who have yet to be conceived are going to benefit from what we are doing. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we do what we do. Every single one of our ancestors was taken from us because they were pushing back against this system. And those are the footsteps that I cannot wait to continue walking behind. So with that, I will start my slides for this evening. And I just want to also share with you all, it's really unfortunate that we live in a world where ignorance is attractive. Okay. It's really unfortunate. So I mean that to say 2 points. First of all, many of you on this call, I'm sure, know where Ethiopia is, but believe it or not, an overwhelming majority of people do not know that Ethiopia is in Africa, which is problematic beyond measure, right? So I'm speaking anecdotally, but I'm also speaking from a collective lens of understanding that I've just literally surveyed people and asked them, where is Ethiopia? And a lot of times the answer is some European country or some European part of the world where they don't understand that Ethiopia is actually in Africa. I also have family members who I've gotten in debates with where they literally told me, no, it's not. And I said, pull up a map because I can show you where it is. And I know where it is. You don't. So let's pull up a map if you don't believe me. It's not me, it's the map. Like, it's on the map. That also brings me to my next point. I bought a global map while I was in Sacramento, and you would be surprised at how many people stared at me in the airport as I was walking through carrying this map, because so many people couldn't understand why a person in 2021 would buy a world map. And so again, that speaks to this narrative that it is so attractive to not be educated. That is so attractive to just take all your information from an unworthy, unreliable source that you can't even commit to understanding that even they know what they're talking about, because they don't. They're feeding you lies. And why are they lying to you? The system is lying to you because the overall objective, never forget this, is to protect and promote capitalist values, which means that private entities have to continue making money. So they have to do whatever they can to make sure that nothing gets in the way of that, which means teaching you that Ethiopia is outside of Africa is a way to protect capitalism. That's what that means. So then you have to take it upon yourselves to increase your what? Political education, because you can't rely on the system to tell you where Ethiopia is, because they're going to lie to you. We already know that, right? So you have to rely on yourself to increase your PE so that you can know where Ethiopia is. And you can teach your children where Ethiopia is so that your children don't grow up and think that it is not in Africa. And then they are 42 having a 30-something-year-old person argue with them about where it is. Don't let that be your kids. Don't let that be your kids. We all should want to grow as humans. Every day that we wake up, we should want to learn and grow as individuals, because what else do we have all this knowledge for? It's not for us, it's for each other, so we can share it with one another and make the conditions of the world better. So I say that to say the Horn of Africa is the first place mentioned in the Bible, and that's from the book of Genesis. And again, a lot of people aren't making that connection because everything about Africa we either ignore or we don't take seriously, or we just think that it's based off of animals and savagery, and we don't think about these ideas where people actually have houses, they actually have jobs, they have transportation, they have relationships, they have baby showers, they have events that where they celebrate children being out of school. They have functioning lives in Africa, just like they do in Canada, just like they do in Asia, just like they do in parts of Brazil and parts of Nicaragua. They have lives just like everywhere else. And so again, your political education is going to help you understand that, because if you're reading books by Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, then you're learning what people are doing at home on the continent, because those two comrades are writing about that. They're helping you to understand that. And so we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about just everything that we've come from to understand how we got to be in the space we're in. Next slide, please. All right, and so we have to also remember the Derg was made up of several entities that united after Selassie's death in 1974. Mengistu emerged as a so-called socialist and name only leader within the Derg, but with other forces like Tigray Liberation Front begin to realize Mengistu was not truly interested in socialist transformation. They begin to mount an offense for independence from Ethiopia and to defeat the Ethiopian government. And so I just want to say this really quickly and then I'll close. We have to remember that if you are of African descent, or even if you were just colonized, but you're not African, you come from some incredibly brave and wonderful people. And I mean that to say, we stand on the shoulders, I personally stand on the shoulders of comrades who have escaped from either being forced to get on the slave ship from Africa or have escaped from a plantation of some type. And I have researched that we have comrades, ancestors, who literally slit their children's throats because they escaped from the plantation. And unfortunately, the overseers caught up with them and they did not want their children to be enslaved again. So they killed their own children. And I'm talking about as young as infants, all the way up to 13 years of age. And then from what I read from the research, the comrade tried to take their own life, but the overseer caught up to them by them, and they were once enslaved again after that. And so just understanding how drastic that is. Yes, I know that's a very stark and dark thing to talk about, but that is who we come from, though. And so we can't just talk about the good part, right? We have to talk about the part where that is the ultimate sacrifice that a person could make, is by taking their own children's life because they do not want their children to be enslaved anymore. And so again, like, I'm leaning to that as bravery and heroism and sheroism and theroism that we come from, and understanding that they wanted us to understand who we were. They wanted us to understand that Ethiopia is in Africa, and they wanted us to pick up a book so we could read more about what's going on in Ethiopia today. They didn't want us to rely on CNN. And so I'm asking you, we are asking you, not just because we're asking you to do this on this seminar, but if you don't care about my dad and I, just think about your ancestors. What would they think about the choices that you're making today in your life? And do they have any advice on how to make things better? I would like to imagine that they would probably want us to be as educated as possible, because they know that what's going on is not the truth. And the best way to reach the truth is by digging under all the lies so you can get to it. Join an organization working for justice, and you all be safe. Thank you.
Ashe, thank you, Shakur, very much. And I want to, we're going to get deep into what's happening in Ethiopia for the remaining almost 45 minutes we have here. But before we do that, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat, particularly from our comrade, Sister Monica in New Mexico, and our comrade, family member, Miko, from the indigenous community, commenting on what we talked about, the death threats in the beginning, and making some, thank you both, some very important comments about how if you don't have any enemies in this society, you're not doing anything. And that's a statement that Secretary, one of our revolutionary Pan-Africanist ideologues, made that I remember every day of my life. If the enemy isn't doing anything against you, it's because you're not doing anything. And so, as we sit here right now, we have, this program is live streamed every week, and then we do it through Zoom. And we have a bunch of people trying to get in this Zoom. And I've asked, if you know how Zoom works, I've asked, because a lot of you might think, well, you always say there's white supremacists. How do you know that? Well, I've asked several times, like, identify yourself, because we don't know who you are, and no response. They just keep trying to get in. So, you can be naive about that if you want, but we know what it is. And so, again, they can do whatever they want. Secretary was correct. Miko's correct. Monica's correct. We will continue to, I hope that what we do here today and every week gives them a seizure and a heart attack. That's what I hope. I hope it bothers them so much that they drop dead and cease to exist. And I'm saying that with full confidence, full understanding of what I'm saying, that and no remorse for saying it whatsoever. I hope that, because that's what they wish upon us. And I understand, as Frantz Fanon taught us, that the only way we will ever be able to effectively deal with these people is when we learn how to speak their language. So that is definitely our position on that. And in that spirit, we talk about what's happening in Ethiopia. So Shakur mentioned some of it, and we'll go into it in greater detail. Just to talk about, Haile Selassie was the emperor of Ethiopia, and he was the ruler of Ethiopia for 44 years until a collection of people, primarily a military coup, overthrew his government in 1974 in Ethiopia. And that collection of forces was called the Derge, D-E-R-G, or some people spell it D-E-R-G-E. And that's what Shakur briefly mentioned. And so this Derge ruled Ethiopia from 1974 until 1991. And what the confusion is oftentimes about the Derg is that in the late 1970s, the person Shakur mentioned, Mengistu Haile Mariam, emerged as the chairperson of the Derg, which was the government in Ethiopia at that time. And when he did that, he emerged calling the Derg a Marxist-Leninist party, meaning that they subscribed to the ideas of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, and that they were a socialist party fighting for revolutionary socialism in Ethiopia. And that was their position. And because that was their stated position during that time, initially in those early years, 1978, 79, 80 era, they began to receive large military package from the former Soviet Union, or the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, USSR. They began to do that. These people still trying to make this happen. Not gonna happen, you all. You gotta find it better. What? I mean, y'all gotta, y'all that got white supremacist relatives, tell them they gotta get better organized. Okay, they're really disappointing that that's the best they can do. So anyway, they went and they established this relationship with the Soviet Union, and they began to use resources from the Soviet Union to engage, even though they were calling themselves socialists. And this is why this is important, is because a lot of people really, like, someone says there's something and you base your analysis on what they say they are. You know, that's why people have so many problems dating, for example, because somebody says something and you base it on that, and you don't, there's no skills there to, you know, that's what dating is supposed to be, for you to ask questions and find out who it is you're dealing with. But people don't ask questions, they don't even know how to do that. So, you know, there's a real lack of skill in terms of being able to figure out who the person is you're dealing with. Well, this is the same thing with socialism. People don't know what the criteria for socialism is. So if someone just says, I'm a socialist, then because we don't know what that is, we just accept that. And whatever behavior they exhibit, then to us, that means that's a referendum on what socialism is, meaning that that's our definition of how to evaluate socialism. Even though we don't even know what socialism is, this person said they were socialists. So since we don't know what it is, whatever that person does, that's how we define socialism. But we don't do that with anything that we believe in. Like if we're Christians, for example, we don't say that because someone else has said they're Christians and is wreaking havoc across the world, we don't see that as a devaluation of Christianity. We just see that as a devaluation of that person that's causing havoc around the world. Well, why would it be any different with any system that's based on principles? So it's the same with socialism. So that's why it's so important what Shakur said, is that you have to make sure you understand what something is, and the only way that's going to happen is you have to study. The CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, CIA, they're not going to educate you about what socialism is. So if you don't want to learn what socialism is, that's okay for now, but that means you have to shut up when the topic comes up. We don't want to hear your opinion about what it is, because your opinion is worthless. So it's you can't straddle both sides of the fence. It's either you do the work to understand what it is, or shut your mouth about it. You know, so when Mengistu said he was a socialist, he got all of this aid from the Soviet Union. We would argue that neither Mengistu nor the Soviet Union was socialist, but that's a whole different seminar topic. But that's what happened in the late 70s. And during that time, this military aid and training that Mengistu got from the Soviet Union, he used it through the Derg to wage a brutal campaign in Ethiopia called the Red Terror campaign. And what that campaign was designed to do was enact ironclad control of Ethiopia under the Derg. And so clearly this is not what a socialist government does. But if you don't know what socialism is, then you're looking at what happened with the Derg and Mengistu, and you say, that's why I don't like socialism, because that's what MSNBC and CNN, that's what they're going to tell you. Well, Mengistu was socialist, and so this is what he did, the Red Terror campaign, so that's why you need to be against socialism. And don't tell me that's not what people think, because I have these discussions with people every single day. So I know how the propaganda works. I know how people are conditioned in this society. So that's what happened. And the Red Terror campaign was a terrible ordeal. There were millions of people murdered during this campaign by the Ethiopian government. Estimates as large as 30 million people were killed in the late 70s and the early 80s. And another thing that happened during that time is that as the Soviets became involved in Afghanistan from the war effort that was precipitated by your United Snakes of America, then Mengistu, they were no longer able to supply the level of resources that Mengistu had began to rely upon. And so by the early 80s, Mengistu magically abandoned his alleged principles to socialism, and now he was no longer a socialist. Now he was a part of the capitalist camp, and he began to build relationships with the US and Zionist Israel and all of the imperialist world. And it was at that time that those entities wanted to have Ethiopia as a political partner because they were concerned about all of the liberation movements who were operational throughout Africa, as they're still concerned about that today. And they were also concerned about the relationships of those African liberation movements to other liberation movements. So for example, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the Eritrean people's struggle. Eritrea at that time was a part of Ethiopia. They were fighting for their independence from Ethiopia, just like Tigray is a part of Ethiopia, and they have been fighting for their independence from Ethiopia. So the Eritrean people founded the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and the EPLF was a strong strategic partner of the Palestinian resistance movement. And so Palestinian groups would establish bases all throughout Africa in places like where the EPLF, controlled territory against Ethiopia. So for that reason, the Zionist state of Israel wanting to crush the Palestinian resistance, because the Palestinians simply want their land back that was stolen by Israel. What you call Israel is actually Palestine. We call it occupied Palestine. So they legitimately wanted their land back. So the Zionists in Israel wanted to use Ethiopia to be their enforcer to crush the Palestinian resistance that was operating like in areas dominated by the Eritrean resistance struggle. And the Ethiopian government obviously wanted to crush the Eritrean movement. So the Ethiopian government accepted this aid relationship from the United Snakes and Zionist Israel. And this represented, again, just like they had previously gotten from the Soviet Union, millions of dollars in annual military aid and training to crush resistance movements. And Ethiopia became basically the police officer for imperialism in the Horn of Africa. Somalia, fighting for their independence and their dignity, had, they told you where there's pirates in the Indian Ocean around Somalia, but you don't call the US Coast Guard pirates, and they don't have in Somalia a huge naval apparatus. So people got in boats with whatever weapons they had, and they did their best to control their territory from Ethiopia and other entities that they deemed a threat, because they knew those entities were operating under the jurisdiction of international imperialism. But they didn't want you to know that. So instead, they told you through their propaganda mechanisms that, well, there's pirates raiding ships. These people patrol the area around their country. And so if you enter into their waters, they had every right to confront you. Just like any country has any right to confront people that come into their territory that they don't know what their objectives are by coming into their territory. So this, obviously this situation around the Horn was very intense, very volatile. And so because of that, Ethiopia became imperialism's police officer to control all of these elements that were happening in that area: the Tigray resistance movement, the Eritrean resistance movement, what was happening in Somalia, the Oromo resistance movement. And that was the case. That was what took place. And so from the late 70s or mid 70s rather, sorry, through current times, there have been several governments that have come to power in Ethiopia. And many of these governments contained many elements. There were, like, for example, for a period of time in the 90s, there were representatives from Tigray who were a part of the national Ethiopian government. And again, Tigray is an area in northern Nigeria, or I'm sorry, northern Ethiopia of 6 to 7 million people that is fighting for its independence from Ethiopia. They don't want to be a part of Ethiopia. They want to be their own nation, as their former comrades, the Eritreans, wanted and established. Now, if you look at a map, there is a separate country on the Horn of Africa called Eritrea. And they fought for that. They had a 30+ year war with Ethiopia to establish their independence there. And Tigray is wanting to do the same thing. At the current time, Tigray has not accomplished that. They're still a part of Ethiopia, but they've continued to engage in warfare against Ethiopia to fight for their autonomy and their independence. So in a real short nutshell, what we've tried to do just now is explain to you all of the variables that make up the conflict in the Horn of Africa, particularly in Ethiopia. Okay, and this has created a devastating instance where millions of people, as I mentioned, are being killed, people are being displaced, and it's created complete havoc in the area. And just like every other part of the world where there's havoc, your tax dollars, if you live in this backward country, are very much a part of the instability there. That's why it's important that you know about it, because you're paying for a lot of the instability. I already told you that a lot of the military aid that Ethiopia has received over the last several decades has come from US tax dollars since the 1970s. So this is why we want to, one of the reasons, you know, of course, the most important reason is because we're Africans and we're concerned about Africa's stability and forward progress, but also, you know, to help people understand that this government is always responsible for instability in the world. Name some instability and we can tell you where this government has a heavy hand in carrying out the instability that exists. So now that you understand the basics of what's happening in Ethiopia, as we mentioned, the Tigray region continued to push for its independence. And they were able to push for a portion of the elections in 2020 in Ethiopia, national elections, to address the question of Tigray. Now, I don't think that there was any illusion that anybody had that the elections scheduled for last year were going to create an independent Tigray country. But I think for the people pushing for that, their concept was that the elections could be a referendum of sorts around autonomy for Tigray. And that could, you know, lead the way for further developments around that question. And so the Ethiopian government, led by the current Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, scheduled those elections in August of last year. The elections, the national elections, never took place. They were postponed indefinitely. The pandemic was cited as the reason for the postponement of those elections. But that, as you can imagine, was not sufficient for the people pushing for an autonomous Tigray in the Horn of Africa. And so this delay in the elections caused these folks in Tigray to go ahead and have their own election in Tigray. And that election, according to what those folks said from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, they were able to get 98% of the people in Tigray. I mean, that sounds really strange that you can get, you know, that much, but, you know, I mean, that's what they're saying, to come out and vote for an independent Tigray. And so this kind of rubber stamp the Tigray People's Liberation Front's ability to engage in a very militant offensive, a military offensive against the Ethiopian government. And that's what's been happening. And that's created a tremendous amount of death and destruction in the country of Ethiopia, where millions of people have been killed just in the last year, just in the last 8 months, rather, this has happened and continues to happen, and where there's instability everywhere, even to the point where most of the regional and worldwide observers are citing the strength of the Tigray People's Liberation Front fighters and the fact that they continue to gain territory, and that there's, you know, a large possibility that the government of Ethiopia will fall as a result of this offensive against them. And so the carnage and the human rights crisis in the region is, you know, really devastating. It's really devastating. And, you know, all this again is connected to this fight for power, this fight for autonomy, this whatever you want to call it, this fight for control in that region. So, you know, I think if you want to understand it from the standpoint of what this backward country is, what their role is in all of this, currently, you know, as we mentioned, Ethiopia has been the US's friend for decades, but in this recent turn of events, you know, this has been changing now for the last several years. And in this recent turn of events that I just described, you know, the US now is saying very positive things about the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and is distancing itself from the Ethiopian government. But again, this country does nothing based on principle. Everything it does is based on its political and economic interests. And, you know, if all of the so-called experts are predicting that the Tigray military offensive against Ethiopia has a high potential of being successful, then the US is just simply trying to prepare to deal with the people that they're going to have to deal with, because that region is very important to the United States, because it's a very important strategic region from a political and economic standpoint. That passageway up through the Indian Ocean is a major passageway for the shipping of commerce from the East and West world, the West to the East world. So from the US capitalist perspective, it's very important for them to ensure that they can control those interests in that area. And we already talked about why Zionist Israel, you know, has an interest in that as well. So this is the current situation that is happening there. Now, let's talk about some of the takeaways from this, right? What does all this mean? Because right now, the situation is that, you know, you've got a lot of people saying the Tigray People's Liberation Front is a terrorist organization. They're inflicting damage and suffering on the people of Ethiopia. And there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that that's true. To a large extent, that's true. And then, of course, you have people saying the Ethiopian government is a neo-colonial government propped up and established by international and supported by international imperialism. And as the Red Terror campaign illustrated, they have reaped destruction on the people of Ethiopia. A lot of the Red Terror campaign was directed at the people in Tigray, for example. So that's no question that that's true. So a lot of times, you know, these situations are obviously very complex. And I know that a lot of you, you know, right now are probably very confused by what you've heard over the last several minutes, because you probably didn't have much of a foundation of it before, you know, you came in here, and that's why you came, and that's good. You know, in 1 hour, we can't explain the geopolitics of the Horn of Africa. But our objective here is to try to at least spark your interest in it so that you can go out and seek information for yourself. You know, that's what we hope to do. But clearly, the point being made right now is that it's the Tigray People's Liberation Front is highly questionable. The Ethiopian government is without question questionable. And a lot of times what happens, particularly for people who claim to be on the so-called left, whatever that means, is there's a tendency to feel like you have to take one side or the other. People always feel like, well, whose side is the right side in this? You know, you have to take one side or the other. So you have to either side with Tigray in this military carnage, or you have to side with Ethiopia, for example. But what we say here is that that's not, it's much more complex than that. And that's not a politically sophisticated approach to take to this situation. But it's important that we say a little about why we think people feel that way, because a lot of people today, whether people know it or not, are still heavily influenced by the politics of the Cold War era. And by Cold War era, we mean from the 19s all the way up through like 1991, 92, the dominant politics in the world were the East, represented by the former Soviet Union, and their entities, like we'll call it the Warsaw Pact, or the Eastern Bloc, or any of the things that they called it, against the West, which is the Western capitalist countries, led by the United Snakes of America, especially after World War II, when Europe declined because of the devastation caused by World War II. The United Snakes emerged as the preeminent power in the world. So specifically, since 1945 through the early 1990s, the Cold War, the US against the Soviet Union, that was the dominant politic. And there was all this pressure to choose a side. When I was growing up, if you even said anything that was even showed any empathy for anything that the Soviet Union was doing, you were called a communist and a traitor to this country. And you had to pick a side. People put a lot of pressure on you to pick a side. And people like us who, in the 80s, clearly declared that we were socialists, like that was dangerous in this country to do then. I know it's hard for people to consider that today, but it was a dangerous thing to do that. Like you were risking attack by publicly declaring. And in fact, I went to the first African Liberation Day organized by the APRP here in Sacramento, California in 1984. And I went there with the intention to join. I had no doubts that I was going to that event to sign up to be a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And when I got there, there weren't a lot of people in the park, in what they call the big park here, McClatchy Park. There weren't a lot of people there, but that didn't bother me because I was going there to become a part of a movement. I'm not somebody that's just swayed by what other people are doing. I went there with an intention to become a part of this movement. And when I got there, our late brother Macheo Shabaka was speaking from the stage. And I heard him say, our comrade Muammar Gaddafi, our comrade Fidel Castro. And nobody talked like that publicly in 1984 in this country. Nobody talked like that. And when I heard that, I said, I'm signing up. Well, I couldn't wait. Hurry up and sign up for this organization. Because I knew, because I was studying, even though I was just 21, 22 years old, I was reading more than most people in their 80s read their whole life. And so I knew who Fidel Castro was. I wasn't relying on MSNBC or CBS or CNN to tell me who he was. I knew who he was. I knew who Muammar Gaddafi was. And I knew that I loved both of them. And I wanted to be a part of any movement that they were a part of. I wanted to be a part of. And it's even more so today, because I'm even more knowledgeable about it and much more mature about it. So that's what I wanted. And I wanted to sign up. But my point is that you have to understand the political pressure from the Cold War era, and that people felt like they had to take sides. And so because of that, when you have a situation like what's happening in Ethiopia, a lot of times people feel like, well, I have to learn enough so I can choose a side. But our point today is that this is much more complex than that. Don't feel like you have to choose between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, for example. Don't feel like that. That's not really what this question is about. And so what we would say instead is that think about what this conflict is about. Whether we're talking about the conflict with Tigray, the conflict with Somalia, talking about Ethiopia's conflicts, the conflict with the Amoro region, the conflicts they've had historically with Eritrea. What is all that based in? And our argument, and this is where our revolutionary Pan-Africanist perspective comes in, our argument is that all of this conflict is the direct result of imperialism and its role in Africa. And when we say imperialism, we're talking about a system that is organized to permit one country to exploit the resources of another country, exploit the human and material resources of another country. That's what imperialism means. So when you hear us talking about imperialism, what we're talking about is that the United States of America could not have the wealth it has without exploiting the wealth of Africa and everywhere else in the world for that matter. So that's what we're talking about, you all, when we say that. And so this is the roots of the problem. The problem is not just, well, if we just elect another government in Ethiopia, then that solves the problem. If Tigray gets their independence, that solves the problem. If Tigray people give up and don't take their independence, that solves the problem. It's not a question of that. Because if you think about it, if people are trying to maintain control, like the Ethiopian government, what is their motivation for wanting to do that? Even if you argue that they were a sincere government, which they're not, that's dedicated to serving the interests of the people of Ethiopia, which they're not. But even if you are, for the sake of argument, you said that, and you said the Tigray people and their quest for independence was a valid struggle, and I can't say that it is. I can't say that it isn't. But what, just for the sake of argument, say that it is, then why would you have to engage in this level of violence to carry that out, to have that control from Ethiopia, to have that independence from all these other regions that are connected to Ethiopia? And we would argue that the sum total of this is imperialism having control over every aspect of Africa through initially colonialism, where they directly on the ground controlled everything in Africa, all the human and material resources, to neo-colonialism, where they're no longer physically in Africa per se, but they established and set up the mechanisms to ensure that their control would continue, even though they're not physically there. That is the system that creates the conditions of scarcity, because they're the ones that control all the African resources are leaving Africa to work in the benefit of the imperialist countries in Europe and the US and Canada, etc., Zionist Israel. So that takes all the necessary resources out of Africa. So now people feel like they have to fight for the crumbs. And that's where the control comes in. And that's why we need to have our own territory, because we're not getting what we need under this government, because there's not enough. There's a scarcity problem. And this scarcity problem is not a real problem based in material reality. It's a problem based in the fact that imperialism controls every aspect of our lives. So that's why scarcity is a problem in the Horn of Africa. Scarcity is a problem in the ghettos of the United States. We still, because imperialism controls every aspect of our lives, so we are convinced that our real struggle is that we got to fight against Africans and other countries because they're taking resources from us. Yeah, if you accept the narrative provided by our enemies, you'll believe that nonsense. Well, our real struggle is these Mexicans. We got to fight against, they're taking resources from us. Well, if you're so stupid that you believe the analysis provided for the people who want to see you dead, then you'll believe that kind of nonsense. Well, the real problem is that white people are the devil, they're evil, and they want to take everything from us. Yeah, sure. I mean, now that one, I can understand why people believe that. I'm not going to, criticize you for believing that. You have every right to believe that's on European people to get to work and do something that makes people not feel that way. I'm not going to put that one on us, but it's still not correct. It's still not the correct position. And while all of us think all of those things, and especially, well, the problem is us. We're the problem because we don't do what we need to do to establish stability in our lifestyle. All of these backward analyses are based in a scarcity theory that we have to compete for the right to live when there's enough resources in Africa alone to meet all of our needs. So clearly that's not the issue. The problem is that we, meaning the masses of our people, do not control those resources. That is the problem. So you will never convince us that imperialism is not the source of the problem in this and every other conflict that's happening, not only in Africa, but everywhere on the planet Earth. So that's why our Pan-Africanist perspective of this conflict is it's not about choosing the Ethiopian government. It's not about choosing the Tigray People's Liberation Front. It's about choosing the masses of people in Africa and in the African diaspora and the masses of humanity on the planet Earth. When you understand that, then you know that when we talk about revolutionary Pan-Africanism, what we are really saying is that the interests of Africa and humanity are always going to be prioritized under one unified socialist Africa. And if that was the case, we wouldn't have to fight for control of a region. We wouldn't have to feel like we have to have our own region because we weren't getting what we needed from a neo-colonial government who's selling all of our resources to the people oppressing us. We would eliminate all of that. It would no longer exist. So that the priority now, instead of being providing resources so that capitalist corporations can continue to dominate the world, the priority would be using Africa's vast mineral resources to serve the needs of Africa and of humanity. So that's why we say the solution to this conflict in the Horn of Africa, the solution to the conflict in Ethiopia is the same solution to every conflict throughout Africa. It's the same solution to every conflict African people have in Brazil. It's the same solution to every conflict African people have in Jamaica, in Nicaragua, in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic. It's the same conflict that every African people have in Venezuela, in Canada, in the United Snakes of America, in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in Australia. Everywhere we exist on the planet Earth, until Africa is free, unified, and socialist, we are going to continue to fight over crumbs. We're going to continue to kill each other over crumbs because our enemies have convinced us that the crumb is the best possible thing we can ever hope to achieve. And so we are willing to take lives over a damn crumb. We are willing to give our lives over a crumb when the reality is that we have vast resources to solve our problem. And if we can just unite and come together, we can form the power base to seize those resources and solve the problems we have once and for all. And so we thank you. We thank you. We thank you. We thank you. We thank you for joining us. And we encourage you to find out as much as you can. You know, you should, hopefully the idea is that you leave here and you're like, okay, I need to find out what I can learn about the Tigray People's Liberation Front. I need to find out what I can learn about Somalia. I need to find out what I can learn about the Red Terror campaign. I need to find out what I can learn about the Eritrean struggle for independence, the Oromo struggle for independence, the history of Ethiopia, the ancient history that Shakura talked about. Genesis 2, chapter 13, talks about Ethiopia. The first country mentioned in the Bible is Ethiopia. In the older testaments, it's called Cush with either a C or a K. And if you study history, the term Cush is the ancient name of Ethiopia. It means land of the burnt faces, right? That's what it means. So study that history. Hopefully this session can motivate you to study that, because Europe wasn't mentioned in the Bible until the last book, the book of Revelation. There was no mention of Europe. So how the hell was Jesus blonde and blue-eyed? Europe wasn't even in the Bible. So Ethiopia is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. The Coptic people went to the hills because of the persecution. The Oromo people went to the hills. They locked their hair in the hills. That's where the hairstyle came from, locked hair. That's why Rastafarians look at Haile Selassie, the former emperor of Ethiopia, as their deity, because the whole concept of their spiritual beliefs came from Ethiopia. It's a historically significant region of the world, and it's ours. It's a part of Africa. It's ours, and we have to defend it and protect it, because our solution is rooted in the liberation of Africa. But the only way we can do that is we have to know that. We have to understand that. And we are never going to understand that as long as we're sitting up here listening to what's his name? I don't know that I can't even think of the Negro's name on CNN. Don, whatever his damn name is. Oh, we're listening to clowns like that miseducate us every single day about who we are and what our interests are. We'll never get clarity of thought to understand how to focus our attention on the necessary tasks at hand to alleviate our suffering. We'll never recognize that we should not be sitting over here begging these people for a job when we have the resources that provided the wealth for them to start the industry for the job that we're applying for in the first place. So why don't we organize, knock out the middleman, which is them, and put ourselves in a position where we can employ ourselves based on our own resources? If you work for a car manufacturing company, if you work for a jewelry manufacturing company, you work for an oil company, you work for phosphates, you work for aluminum, you work for cocoa, any of these, I can go on and on and on and on. These are all African resources. We should be controlling them. And one day soon, we will be controlling them. So we shouldn't have to beg these people for no jobs. That's absurd. When all the resources come from the same place we come from. All the resources are stolen from the same place that we were stolen from. And we sitting up here begging these people for a job, talking about, well, I'm an American. If you were American, you wouldn't have to be scared when the police pull you over. So that right there should tell you you ain't no American. You wouldn't have to be afraid that your relatives would be pulled over by the police. You wouldn't have to be worried about whether you would have respect and dignity from people. If you were American, none of that would be an issue for you. The fact that you don't have any of that should tell you clearly that you're not an American. And you shouldn't even want to be an American, because that means that you are signing on to stealing this land, murdering the indigenous people, being nothing but a complicit thief in history. Why would anybody in their right mind want to be that? So I gave all that back to them years ago. I ain't no American. I'm an African fighting for African liberation. And when the white man asked me, well, why are you here? I told him, because for 500 years, you've been stealing everything we got. So the only reason why I'm here is to help us get it back. And the minute we get it back, I will be gone. This will be indigenous people's land. And because of your attitude, they'll probably want you to leave. You'll have to leave, and you can get in your kayak. And while you're kayaking back to Europe, you can think about how confused you are. So we thank you all for being here today. We appreciate you being here. And we want to invite you to come back next week. Our Ancestors' Voices, Sunday, January 2nd in the new year. It says 2021, but y'all know that's wrong. It'll be 2022 in the new year. We're going to broadcast the program that we were not able to broadcast last week, the conflict between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Who instigated that conflict? Who benefited from that conflict? And what contribution did these giants of history make to our struggle for freedom and liberation? So you don't want to miss that. 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. Same revolutionary Pan-Africanist channels will be here. We want to invite you to buy and support independent revolutionary African organization. I'm sure you can hear my birds in the background. They are very vocal, and they're telling you, I'm interpreting for them, support independent revolutionary African organization. That's what they're saying right now, if you can hear them. And they're trying to tell you to go to the APRP Forward Ever shop and buy one of the sweatshirts, like the one modeled in the picture, one of the t-shirts, one of the items we have. Support revolutionary independent African organization. If you don't, no one else will. We need you to do that. Go to the APRP-INTL.org site, sign up to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Please go to abetterworld.me. Those of you who are making the death threats, you already know that because you flooded with that. So please continue to do that. And you can also watch all of these videos are housed there. You click on the video tab, you can do that. Go to hoodcommunist.org. I am one of the editors there, proud to do that. We have a bi-monthly Telegram event. We'll be doing that this Thursday. So we want to definitely invite you to come to that. Download the Telegram app on your smartphone, through your smartphone store, and you can do that. And please support all of our AAPRP broadcasts, the Pantula broadcast, the AAPRP Revolutionary African Women broadcast, Forward Ever broadcast, our comrades in New Mexico, their weekly news broadcast, Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. Please do that. That's the political education you need. It's right there. You're not getting it from imperialism. You got to get it from the people. And it's there for you, so you should support it. Tell people about it. Support it. How you gonna say you for forward progress is all you know is CNN, and all you promote is CNN? You ain't for no people's progress. Support real information. It's right here in front of you. So please help us. Please, we beg of you to do that. And please continue to buy my book, My Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 US, and would love to help you organize in reading it. So please continue to do that. We are very humbled by people's support and willingness to want to organize for justice, and that this book is helping people play a role in wanting to do that. So we appreciate all of you. We thank you for coming. Please come back next week. Please bring a friend, but let us know who they are, or if they're trying to get in Zoom, they won't get in because we don't know if they're really a friend or if they're a real foe. And we don't want to let foes in here because they try to mess up our ability to spread this information. So please bring some people, let them know, come back, support all these programs, support other organizations working for justice, join an organization working for justice. We appreciate each and every one of you. Forward ever, backwards never. One unified socialist Africa. Capitalism, y'all already know, just like patriarchy, it's got to go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.